Sergey, welcome to Brainsplain.
Nice to meet you.
RJ, welcome to Brainsplain.
Sweet.
Brainsplain is a series where I invite the public to talk about new discoveries in mental health. I give folks a little piece of mental health research, then folks give me a piece of their mind. I've staged us on a pier that's wobbling back and forth because I'm talking about the topic of psychosis, a medical condition in which people see things that aren't real. They have feelings of...
Insects, by chance?
They may. There are some kinds of psychosis that exactly do involve seeing insects. Today I was looking for reactions to research on Stigma and Bias by Eleanor Longden. Eleanor Longden noticed that she was hearing voices. It didn't bother her that much, but one time she went in to see her doctor and she said, "I'm hearing voices," and they immediately gave her the label of schizophrenia. After Eleanor got her diagnosis of schizophrenia, she came to believe that when doctors and scientists use labels like schizophrenia, and they understand unusual brains in terms of disease pathology and biology, that this is not entirely good in every way for the people with unusual brains. Then when she told her doctor that she heard voices, it suddenly made all of the medical staff, professionals, doctors, nurses suspicious of her, everything she said. But Eleanor Longden wasn't content to remain a passive consumer of healthcare information from the medical establishment. She did a very brainsplainy thing and flipped the script. To weigh in on what should be done about mental health research of her condition, she did some research of her own. So she actually took charge. She said, "I'm not just going to be a victim of this, I'm going to make a difference." She went and got her license, clinical psychologist, and she published a paper just recently about surveying since 1975 to 2011, all the data she could find.
To feel what I feel.
She studied the results of surveys, forcing people to pick if their pre-existing beliefs were that psychosis comes out of difficult childhood experiences, or whether it's primarily a medical, biological diagnosis.
I know you feel it. I want everybody to feel what I feel.
People surveyed in 14 different countries, hundreds of people called on the telephone, said that when they thought of psychosis as mostly a condition that came from traumatic childhood experiences instead of a medical condition, they were more likely to accept and welcome people who have psychosis. Those who said it's a medical illness understood the pathology maybe, but they said, "I don't trust them, I believe people with psychosis are dangerous."
Okay.
You're told there are people who hear voices, and there were 24 different surveys, so probably it was conducted in a various ways. I was going to use the word heterogeneous, but this is Brainsplain.
Okay.
Various ways they did these surveys. The basic template is, there are people who hear voices. Do you believe this is related to a medical condition, or B, childhood experiences? The childhood experiences group thought more highly.
That makes sense. You're sort of not personally to blame or something, or there's something I guess people can sympathize more if it's something that happened to you that is causing. It's like post-traumatic stress syndrome. People are familiar with that one. And so it's interesting that people had pre-existing beliefs, because I didn't even know what the definition of psychosis was. I imagine that's true for most people.
Eleanor didn't stop after she gathered data about pre-existing biases about psychosis. She also wanted to find out if people would be less or more biased against those with psychosis depending on how the public was educated, what information they were given. There was also a series of 17 experiments where they would give people, usually like undergraduates, a test. They'd say, "Come into the office and we're going to tell you about a person with a clinical condition," what we call a clinical vignette. Yep. And they would say, "So-and-so had bad childhood experiences. She was abused by her stepfather, let's say. Later on, she came to hear voices. Would you trust this person to work next to them, to live next to them? Do you believe that person is likely to be violent?" The people who were given the vignettes about the childhood experiences answered more favorably about those with psychosis than the people who were said, "There was somebody who was given a clinical diagnosis of schizophrenia because she was hearing voices."
So that shows that these behaviors or these opinions can change.
After they had a chance to reflect on Eleanor Longden's life and research, my conversation partners were able to share valuable insights on how to regard those with mental illness and also on the future of psychiatry.
We live in a society in which it's very easy to, it's not only easy, but it's very convenient to put things into frames, to put things into definitions. Because defining something means simplifying it. And simple is good. 21st century America should be simple. This is how people like it. This is what sells. This is what makes your life easy. And easy is good. Mm-hmm. But the question then is it really? So in a way, I think putting people into categories mm-hmm. is something that, if you think about it, it's very typical for the times in which we're living. You're not defined as an individual in any way. You're defined as an entity that belongs to a certain category, that fits into certain pattern. I was seeing a psychiatrist a while ago, and we live in times in which this is not a stigma. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was just a very unpleasant experience because I was not treated as an individual with specific problems that I wanted to address. I was treated as somebody who had to answer the questions that this particular health practitioner had for every patient. And why I'm saying this, because it ended up that both me and my wife were seeing the same psychiatrist and we had to go through exactly the same stuff.
It wasn't personalized.
Absolutely not. And this is something that as I see it, is very common in the healthcare in general. You're seeing as soulless entity,
So what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out and is about to be a psychiatrist?
Treat your patients as bodies that have a soul, mm-hmm. not as simply as patients, You basically, and there are many people who go to see their psychiatrist not because they think it's going to do any good seeing a person, but because they need a prescription for medication. And that's the wickedness of the profession, There is nothing, think about it, maybe the generation of your grandparents or the generation of my grandparents who were living in a city that was much smaller than this one, and this is by far, it's not a huge city. And there was a doctor on the street who knew all his or her patients by name, a doctor who you see on the street and they greet you and you have a little chat and so on. Here there is this distance that if I'm your patient, you have to be as distant as possible with me because, those are the regulations, otherwise you might get in trouble. But where does this lead us, especially in a profession that's so sensitive, that deals with something that, you finally call it mental health, but it's not only about the mind, it's also about the soul.
Being able to be empathetic, mm-hmm. that when you learn about who they are, why they are, why they are.
What's their story?
Yes.
That's exactly the thing. So she wrote in this article, and she says, the woman who wrote this article says, when she walks into a diagnosis, she'd rather be asked, what happened to you that you have these symptoms, rather than what are you?
Exactly.
What is your...
Why are you instead of what are you? That's so true.
I think if we were to look at it, again, relating a mental illness back to a more widely accepted illness like cancer or heart disease or, any number of things, if we can get a mental illness to be looked at that way, mm-hmm. instead of as it's, make somebody dangerous or unpredictable. Everybody's dangerous and unpredictable. Especially when you get this many bugs around you.
I'm on the same page.
All right.
Thank you so much, heroically patient of you. Oh my gosh, look at this.
Oh my gosh.
We're swarmed.